Welcome to History Crossroads, where past meets present, and every story reveals a new path through time.
Imagine a government scientist working in the shadows of the Cold War, pouring LSD into the drinks of unsuspecting citizens. A man who believed he could erase memories, control minds, and create human puppets. A man so powerful that when his career ended, his secrets were wiped from history. This man existed, and his name was Sidney Gottlieb. For decades, Gottlieb worked within the CIA, pioneering some of the most bizarre, unethical, and downright terrifying experiments ever conducted by the U.S. government. Under his watch, entire populations were used as guinea pigs, drugged, brainwashed, and subjected to psychological torture, all in the name of Cold War espionage. But his story doesn't end when MKUltra was exposed. No, Sidney Gottlieb walked away without punishment. He disappeared into a life of farming and meditation, as if he had not spent decades playing God with the human mind. Today, we go beyond the surface of MKUltra. We're diving into the stories the CIA doesn't want you to know, the classified programs, the mysterious deaths, the cover-ups, and the lasting impact of Gottlieb's twisted experiments. By the time we're done, you might just question how much of our world today is still shaped by the ghost of MKUltra. This is History Crossroads, and today we unravel the dark legacy of Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA's mad scientist. To understand why Sidney Gottlieb became the architect of mind control, we need to step back in time, to an era where paranoia ruled the world. The Cold War was at its peak. The U.S. feared that the Soviet Union had discovered methods to brainwash soldiers and spies, making them defectors without even realizing it. The CIA, desperate to keep up, launched a series of covert operations to crack the secrets of the human mind. At the center of it all, Sidney Gottlieb, a man with the power to run experiments without oversight, who convinced the government that the key to controlling enemies wasn't in bombs or bullets, it was in the brain. And what better way to access the human mind than through drugs? But before he became the puppet master of MKUltra, Sidney Gottlieb had a very different life. Who was he? And how did a mild-mannered chemist turn into one of the most feared men in CIA history? Sidney Gottlieb wasn't just interested in mind control, he was obsessed with it. Under his guidance, the CIA's MKUltra program pushed the boundaries of human experimentation in ways that were not only unethical, but often terrifying. The world was locked in a Cold War, and intelligence agencies were desperate for an advantage. To Gottlieb, the human mind was the ultimate battlefield, and LSD was his weapon of choice. But drugs were just the beginning. Soon his experiments would expand into psychological warfare and radical methods of behavioral manipulation that blurred the line between science fiction and reality. One of the lesser-known experiments under MKUltra took place at the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, a facility that doubled as a prison for drug offenders. Here, the CIA funded a study where inmates, many of whom were already struggling with addiction, were unknowingly subjected to high doses of LSD over extended periods. Some were given the drug daily for 77 consecutive days. The goal, according to declassified documents and expert analysis, the CIA aimed to determine whether the human mind could be completely erased and rewritten for intelligence purposes. Instead, many test subjects suffered permanent psychological damage, hallucinations that never ended, and extreme paranoia. They had no idea they were being used as test subjects in a government mind control experiment. Some of them would later report lifelong struggles with schizophrenia-like symptoms, while others would never fully recover from the trauma imposed on their minds. This was not an isolated case. Lexington was just one of many locations where Gottlieb conducted human trials, often without consent. The notion of informed consent was entirely disregarded. To the CIA, these individuals were expendable assets, test subjects to be used and discarded. If the Lexington experiments weren't disturbing enough, Gottlieb's next project took things even further. The CIA set up brothels in San Francisco and New York, where unsuspecting men were lured in by prostitutes who secretly worked for the agency. Unbeknownst to them, their drinks were laced with LSD. Hidden behind one-way mirrors, CIA agents observed their reactions, taking notes on how the drug altered behavior. These experiments were not just unethical, they were deeply intrusive, exploiting individuals without their knowledge or consent, using sex and deception as tools to study the power of drugs on the mind. The data collected was supposed to help the CIA develop better interrogation techniques. Instead, it left behind a trail of ruined lives and shattered minds. Many of the men subjected to these tests were everyday citizens, drawn into a web of deception without any clue that they were now part of a clandestine government experiment. Some experienced psychotic breaks, others fell into deep paranoia, and some were unable to return to normal life after their experiences. The psychological toll was severe, but the CIA saw these victims as nothing more than collateral damage in their pursuit of mind control technology. MKUltra wasn't just about drugs. Gottlieb wanted to know how far the human brain could be pushed before it completely broke. In a series of secretive experiments, subjects were placed in total isolation. No light, no sound, no human contact. Some were left alone for days or even weeks, with only their thoughts and drug-induced hallucinations for company. In Canada, Dr. Ewan Cameron, a CIA-funded psychiatrist, took these experiments to horrifying levels. He used what he called psychic driving, playing repeated phrases on loop while patients were drugged and restrained. Some patients forgot their own identities, others lost the ability to speak, and many suffered permanent brain damage. The trauma inflicted upon these individuals was beyond comprehension. Some patients, when released, had to relearn basic functions like feeding themselves and walking. And the worst part? These weren't enemy agents. They were innocent civilians, mothers, fathers, students, patients seeking help. They had walked into a psychiatric hospital expecting treatment and left with their minds irreversibly altered, their pasts erased, their futures stolen. Gottlieb's work created a ripple effect that lasted far beyond his time with the CIA. Many survivors of MKUltra's experiments lived in fear, not just of the memories that haunted them, but of what else might have been done to them without their knowledge. Some claimed they continued to be monitored years later, while others struggled to reintegrate into society. While the U.S. government later paid settlements to a handful of victims, countless others never received recognition or justice. Lawsuits against the CIA were largely dismissed on the grounds of national security, burying the truth beneath layers of classified documents. The agency distanced itself from Gottlieb's work, but the techniques developed under MKUltra didn't disappear. They evolved, finding new applications in modern psychological warfare and interrogation methods. Gottlieb and the CIA wanted to find ways to control people, but instead, they left many irreversibly broken, haunted by paranoia, suffering from permanent psychological trauma, and in some cases, losing their ability to function in society. And yet, this was just the beginning. In the next section, we'll explore how these experiments led to even darker projects, ones that involved biological weapons, assassination attempts, and the quest to create the perfect mind-controlled assassin. Sidney Gottlieb's experiments under MKUltra were not just about breaking minds, they were about controlling them through behavioral programming, compliance enforcement, and the potential for creating unwitting operatives. As the CIA's chief chemist, he took his research beyond mind control and into the realm of covert assassinations and biological warfare. If the agency could manipulate thought, why not manipulate life and death? In this segment, we'll explore the CIA's most audacious and bizarre assassination attempts, all engineered by Gottlieb's twisted ingenuity. Gottlieb didn't just experiment with LSD, he was also the CIA's top poison expert. He developed deadly toxins, biological weapons, and silent assassination techniques that could be used against America's enemies. His poisons were designed to kill without a trace, making deaths appear as accidents or natural causes. One of the most infamous attempts involved Fidel Castro. The CIA saw the Cuban leader as a major threat, and Gottlieb's team was tasked with eliminating him. Over the years, they devised numerous outlandish plots. Poisoned cigars. A box of cigars laced with a deadly toxin was sent to Castro, but they never reached him. Exploding seashells. Since Castro loved diving, the CIA designed a seashell rigged with explosives, hoping he'd pick it up. Tainted wetsuit. A diving suit coated in toxic fungus and a breathing apparatus laced with tuberculosis bacteria was prepared but never delivered. Poisoned pen. An operative was given a ballpoint pen rigged with a hidden hypodermic needle containing a lethal substance, but the attempt was never carried out. Contaminated coffee. There was an attempt to poison Castro's morning coffee with botulinum toxin, but it failed due to an operational mishap. Every attempt failed, and Castro reportedly joked in interviews that if surviving assassination attempts were an Olympic event, he'd have won gold. Over the years, he frequently referenced these failed plots with humor, using them to highlight the resilience of his government against foreign interference. Gottlieb's deadly innovations weren't just for communist leaders. In 1960, he prepared a handkerchief contaminated with a lethal biological agent intended for Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The CIA viewed Lumumba as a Soviet ally and wanted him gone. The plan was to have an operative get close enough to hand him the infected cloth, but the mission never went through as planned. Lumumba was eventually overthrown and executed by local forces, but the CIA's involvement remains murky. Other bizarre assassination methods concocted by the CIA under Gottlieb's guidance included lethal toothpaste, developed as a discreet and effective method to eliminate an African revolutionary leader. The toothpaste contained a highly lethal toxin that would be absorbed through the gums when used. However, the operation was ultimately abandoned due to logistical issues and concerns over ensuring the target actually used the tainted product. Poisoned cold cream, a toxin-laced facial cream meant to kill an unsuspecting target. Anthrax-laced clothing, a strategy considered for assassinating political figures by sending them contaminated garments. Perhaps the most chilling case tied to Gottlieb is the mysterious death of Frank Olson, a government scientist who had been working on secret CIA biological warfare projects. In 1953, Olson was secretly dosed with LSD by Gottlieb himself during a CIA retreat. Days later, Olson became increasingly paranoid and disturbed. On November 28, 1953, he plunged to his death from the 13th floor of a New York City hotel. The official story, suicide. But Olson's family never believed it. Decades later, when his body was exhumed, forensic experts found evidence suggesting he had been struck on the head before falling, raising the possibility that he had been thrown out the window to silence him. To this day, the full truth remains unknown, but many believe Olson knew too much about the CIA's darkest secrets and paid the ultimate price. Further complicating the mystery, declassified documents revealed that Olson had expressed moral concerns about the nature of his work in biological warfare, particularly regarding the ethical implications of using chemical and biological agents on human subjects. He reportedly feared that his research was being weaponized for assassinations and covert operations, raising doubts about the morality of his role in the CIA's secret programs. Some theorists suggest that his increasing doubts made him a liability to the CIA, leading to his untimely demise. Beyond direct assassinations, Gottlieb also spearheaded the CIA's biological warfare programs, researching how diseases and toxins could be used to eliminate enemies. His team studied ways to infect entire populations, from contaminating food and water supplies to delivering deadly bacteria through aerosols. One chilling experiment involved releasing whooping cough bacteria in Tampa Bay, Florida, as a test to see how the disease would spread. Another involved infecting livestock in Cuba, hoping to cripple the country's food supply. Additional experiments explored airborne anthrax dispersion, a plan to introduce anthrax spores into enemy environments to create a silent pandemic. Tainted sugar exports, an attempt to introduce biological agents into exported goods to weaken entire economies. Covert water contamination, plans to test how disease-carrying bacteria could be introduced into municipal water systems. These operations were part of a broader Cold War strategy, but they raised serious ethical questions about how far the U.S. government was willing to go in the name of national security. Sidney Gottlieb's work extended far beyond mind control. He was America's deadliest scientist, engineering ways to kill without detection. Yet despite his role in some of the most disturbing CIA operations, he managed to disappear into quiet retirement, evading accountability. The techniques he developed influenced later covert operations, interrogation tactics, and even modern biowarfare research. Even today, discussions surrounding government experimentation, secret assassination programs, and biological weapons development are tinged with the echoes of Gottlieb's legacy. Controversies such as the use of enhanced interrogation techniques in the War on Terror, the ethics of drone warfare, and the development of new biotechnologies for military applications all raise similar concerns about the balance between national security and human rights. His work remains one of the darkest stains on U.S. intelligence history, a cautionary tale of how secrecy and power can lead to morally reprehensible actions under the guise of national security. In the next segment, we'll explore how Gottlieb escaped justice, how MKUltra was exposed to the public, and the lasting legacy of his experiments in modern intelligence operations. Sidney Gottlieb spent decades designing the CIA's most notorious experiments, but eventually, even the most clandestine operations come to light. Rumors of strange experiments and psychological manipulation had circulated for years, whispered among investigative journalists and former intelligence officers, but they lacked concrete evidence until the first major revelations started to surface. The downfall of MKUltra was not the result of a dramatic whistleblower or a sudden act of conscience. It was a slow unraveling, a revelation built on investigative journalism, congressional hearings, and classified documents slipping through the cracks. For years, MKUltra remained buried in the deepest vaults of CIA secrecy. Even as stories of mind control experiments and illegal drug tests leaked into public discourse, the full scope remained unknown. That changed in 1974 when investigative journalist Seymour Hersh published a bombshell report in the New York Times, revealing that the CIA had been conducting illegal experiments on U.S. citizens. This ignited public outrage and forced the government to act. The next year, President Gerald Ford ordered the formation of the Church Committee, a Senate investigative body tasked with uncovering abuses by U.S. intelligence agencies. As hearings commenced, shocking details surfaced. Thousands of unsuspecting individuals had been subjected to drug experiments without their consent. Psychiatric patients and prisoners had been used as test subjects in extreme sensory deprivation studies. The CIA had destroyed much of MKUltra's documentation, making a full accounting of its activities nearly impossible. Some experiments had extended beyond U.S. borders, with operations conducted in Canada, Europe, and even Asia. When Sidney Gottlieb was finally called to testify, he did what any skilled intelligence officer would do. He downplayed his role, insisting that the program had been poorly understood and largely ineffective. He painted himself as a scientist, merely following orders, a patriot seeking to advance national security. What he did not mention was the systematic destruction of evidence. In 1973, anticipating potential exposure, Gottlieb personally oversaw the destruction of thousands of documents related to MKUltra, erasing much of the direct proof of what had been done. The paper trail was gone, but testimonies from victims and declassified fragments painted a damning picture. Beyond dodging direct responsibility, Gottlieb's testimony raised deeper questions. How many other covert operations had been carried out under similar secrecy? If MKUltra had continued unchecked for over 20 years, what other programs remained hidden from the public eye? With the government's dirty laundry now public, lawsuits began piling up. Survivors of MKUltra, including those subjected to forced drugging and psychological torture, demanded justice. Among the most infamous cases was that of Dr. Ewan Cameron's victims, psychiatric patients in Canada, who had been unknowingly subjected to mind-wiping experiments funded by the CIA. While some victims received settlements, the U.S. government refused to accept full responsibility. Many lawsuits were dismissed on national security grounds, further burying the darkest truths of MKUltra. The Canadian government was later forced to compensate some of Cameron's victims, but for many, justice remained out of reach. New revelations also indicated that experiments had not been limited to adults. Some files suggested that orphanages and juvenile detention centers had been sites for early childhood psychological conditioning research. These experiments allegedly involved prolonged sensory deprivation, forced exposure to repetitive audio messages, and the use of drugs to suppress or manipulate memory formation, further deepening the moral horror of the program. The CIA officially ended MKUltra in 1973, but many believe its legacy lingers. Some interrogation techniques used in Guantanamo Bay and CIA black sites bear an unsettling resemblance to Gottlieb's work, particularly in areas of sensory deprivation and psychological manipulation. Methods such as forced standing for prolonged periods, stress positions, and exposure to extreme temperatures closely mirror techniques tested under MKUltra to break subjects mentally and physically. Additionally, modern research into neurological warfare, behavioral programming, and non-lethal weapons raises concerns that MKUltra's core principles may have simply evolved rather than disappeared. Many point to Operation Artichoke and Project Bluebird, precursor programs to MKUltra, as evidence that mind control and interrogation research never truly ceased. Others believe that parts of MKUltra were simply absorbed into more classified research efforts under different names, citing later intelligence programs related to human behavior manipulation. After MKUltra was exposed, Gottlieb vanished from public life. He retired to a quiet life in rural Virginia, where he focused on organic farming and spiritual meditation, an ironic retreat for a man responsible for some of the most unethical experiments in modern history. Gottlieb never faced criminal charges. He died in 1999, taking many of MKUltra's darkest secrets with him. Some believe he was the ultimate spy master, a ghost in the shadows whose work remains embedded in the fabric of modern intelligence operations. Before his death, a number of intelligence researchers attempted to interview him, but he largely refused to comment. One of the few exceptions was an approach by journalist H.P. Albarelli Jr., who investigated MKUltra and its connections to mysterious deaths, including that of Frank Olson. However, Gottlieb remained evasive, offering little insight beyond claiming that his work had been in the nation's best interest. The few statements he did make suggested that he felt little remorse, insisting that his work was done in the interest of national security. MKUltra represents one of the most disturbing chapters in U.S. intelligence history. It exposed the dangers of unchecked government power, the ethical void of Cold War-era espionage, and the terrifying lengths to which agencies will go in the name of national security. Yet for all the horrors that were revealed, much remains unknown. How much of MKUltra continues under different names? What secrets did Sidney Gottlieb take to his grave? And most importantly, what are governments willing to do today that we won't uncover until decades from now? In the wake of these revelations, renewed discussions about ethical oversight in intelligence operations persist. This led to the introduction of policies such as the 1976 Executive Order 11,905, which prohibited U.S. intelligence agencies from engaging in assassination, and later, the Intelligence Oversight Act of 1980, which aimed to increase congressional supervision of covert activities. While safeguards have been put in place to prevent future abuses, history has shown that secrecy breeds corruption. The story of MKUltra serves as a stark warning that when power is unchecked, the potential for abuse is limitless. Thank you for listening to this episode of History Crossroads. The story of Sidney Gottlieb and MKUltra is a chilling reminder of the hidden corners of history and the ethical dilemmas that still impact us today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most secretive figures, make sure to follow History Crossroads for more episodes on historical figures who shaped the world, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with fellow history enthusiasts. Join us next time as we uncover another fascinating story from the past. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring history.